This was in late August of 2018. I remember because the road that got me there was powdered with that dry dust that hangs in the heat and coats your ankles like flour. It hadn't rained in weeks, not out there, and the forest felt like it had paused to hold its breath. I'd been combing old forums looking for forgotten places, fire lookouts, decommissioned ranger cabins. Things everyone says not to mess with, usually for good reasons. Someone in a thread from years back mentioned a lone tower on a ridgeline that hadn't been maintained since the 90s. Probably still standing, the post said. It probably did most of the work in my head. I parked where the logging road dissolved into ruts and brush, a spot that used to be a pullout before saplings claimed it. I nosed the truck into a ditch at an angle that made me wonder if I'd be able to back out later, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing human. No highway hum, no farm dogs carrying on. Just the insect saws and a lazy breeze moving invisible through needles. I loaded my pack, 2 days of water and food, a foam pad bag, tiny stove, headlamp, extra batteries, GPS unit the size of an old flip phone, paper map even though it didn't show the tower. Knife I never use, bear spray I hope to never need. The sky was an uncomplicated blue. I took a photo of the truck and the spot where it sat, habit more than reason, then shouldered in. There isn't a trail out there. You thread game paths when you can, and shoot compass lines when you can't. The understory ranged from forgiving to malicious. Fern, salal, blow down slick as glass in shade. Every half hour I checked the track I was scribbling on the GPS, a green line dragging itself toward a waypoint labeled Lookout. There were moments I thought I heard highway noise, and it would turn out to be wind where it gathered itself on the far slope. I made a steady pace anyway. Step, plant, step, scan for snakes out of habit, sip, keep going. No signs anyone else had used this way recently. No cairns, no wrappers. The forest tucked around me and let me through like I wasn't worth the trouble. After 4.5 hours of pushing and side-hilling and swearing under my breath at a tangle of alder whips, the ridge shouldered up on my left, and then I saw it. The thin geometry of something straight and intentional in a place that hates straight lines. The cab was a small cube of grey perched on stilts, the kind of simple rectangle that looks like a child's drawing of a house, raised by spiders. The paint was almost entirely gone. The metal ladder hung down from a hatch like a tired tongue. Every part of it said, "Do not climb," and yet there I was, measuring it with my eyes the way you measure a fall before you take it. I walked the perimeter first. The footings were poured concrete, spalled at the edges but not fractured. The support timbers were old, but didn't crumble under a thumbnail. There was no sign of people, no beer cans, no cigarette ends, no char circles, no names carved into anything. I pressed a palm to one of the posts, solid. I gave it a slow push. It didn't complain. That was enough logic to cover what was mostly want. I tested the first rung with my weight. It flexed and voiced a dry little groan, but it held. I climbed. On top, the catwalk wrapped the cab in a square. The windows were mostly there, mostly cracked, some loose in their frames. Inside was a room smaller than a college dorm, maybe 10 by 15. Bare floor, the skeletal remains of a cot in one corner, an old wooden desk against the window that faced west. A ring of dead insects lay where the glass met the sill. The view was the point of the entire enterprise. Treetops, like a frozen sea in every direction. No houses, no threads of road, no radio towers, no contrails. The horizon did a full, slow circle around me. I tried to imagine someone sitting here for a summer in the 50s, with a map and an alley-dade, making dots into coordinates and smoke into decisions. I could feel how silence would have been a tool then, not a threat. I set my pack in the corner, rolled out the pad and bag, and cooked on the catwalk with my back against the outer wall. The stove sounded too loud in the stillness. When I turned it off, the sudden absence of noise made my head ring. The sun fell clean behind a bank of cloud that hadn't been there an hour earlier, and the forest lost detail with the light. I ate slow, not because it was good, but because it gave my hands something to do. Then I sat with the last of the day and let it go by on its own schedule. Darkness came like a pulled shade. No moon made it up through the cloud. The tower ceased to be an object and became a place defined by feel. Board edges against my heels, splinters threatening through old paint, the spannable width of the catwalk underfoot. Everything beyond the rail was a suggestion. I stayed out anyway. I grew up in a place where you learn to tell the difference between noises the wind makes and noises feet make. If I'm honest, part of me wanted something to happen. That part was the first to be satisfied. About an hour in, a measure of time made of nothing but my own breathing and the low talk of the forest, an orange light moved below the canopy to my south. Not a headlamp. Not the cool blue-white of LEDs or the skim of car beams through trunks. Orange, like a coal being carried. It wavered the way live flame does, even when you try to hold it steady. It paused, turned aside, paused again. It came closer for maybe 10 steps, and then slid behind a wall of firs and did not come out the other side. I waited. I told myself what I always tell myself when a thing is abnormal, but not yet dangerous. There are reasons. A hunter, a ranger with old-school gear, someone else with the same idea about sleeping under a roof. For a long time, nothing else happened, and the temperature dropped enough that the wood under me began to give those slow, aching pops the cold asks from old structures. The tower voiced its age in a dozen registers. I let my back complain until discomfort won, and I went inside. I zipped into the bag with my boots by the door and my headlamp clipped to the strap. The way you do when you're alone and not entirely certain about the night. Sleep took a while to agree with that setup. Then it took me anyway. I don't know what pulled me back. No dream I can remember. No sudden noise. Just the sense that the world outside had changed in some specific way that didn't bother to explain itself. Then I heard it. Soft, regular, spaced like a decision repeating. The ladder metal has a way of speaking when it's carrying weight. The top of the ladder has 2 hinged brackets where it meets the hatch opening, and those hinges announced the seconds with a tired little cry. In one step, another, closer than the last. The sound rose out of the column of black air, walked onto the wood of the catwalk, in imagination only, and then stopped. That stillness felt full. I listened so hard, my ears made their own phantom tones. I slid the bag down to my knees and reached for the headlamp without snapping it on. The room had shrunk around me in the dark. Ceilings are lower and corners sharper when you can't see them. I rolled to my knees, took the pack with one hand, and moved to the door with the kind of care you use to keep ice from complaining under your feet. I eased the door open and stepped onto the catwalk. My breath made a brief cloud and vanished. Silence. I waited just on the safe side of the door. 30 seconds. 45. A minute that felt like it had 50 minutes inside it. There's a point where your mind offers a trade. Either nothing is there, or everything is there. I decided to walk. I kept my back to the wall and edged along the catwalk toward the corner that would open into the ladder well. The night smelled like old resin and nothing else. I leaned as I reached the opening and aimed the headlamp down before turning it on, as if I could catch whatever was below before the light could decide to help me. Click, the beam went down a wet rope of metal to the ground. Rungs, an empty square of grass. The nearest trees holding still as if they were trying not to be caught breathing. No one on the ladder. No one under it. The word I remember thinking wasn't a word. It was a shape. Something round and cold that sat just under my heart. The footsteps came from the far side of the catwalk. Wooden thumps too fast to be casual and too light to be boots. They rounded the corner, as if whoever made them knew the map of this platform better than I did. I didn't turn to meet them. I dropped into the hatch, swung my legs out, and went down the ladder with both hands working rungs in a braid with my feet. The metal was damp and slick. My heels skated once and found purchase again because panic is a terrible climber but a good motivator. Halfway down, I looked up because some part of me wanted to know that nothing was following. A shape leaned into the square above. Shoulders and head, and no detail where a face should be, the way a person is when your light hits the wrong angle and decides to be useless. That was all I needed. I covered the rest of the gap in a series of movements I wouldn't call steps, hit the ground too hard on one knee, and rose with my pack dragging behind me. I didn't look back again. I hit the tree line and let it take me. I made 2 bad decisions and 1 good one. Bad. I kept my light off for maybe 20 seconds because I thought I'd be harder to spot, which is like choosing to be blind in a forest that will punish you for it. But I moved too fast at first and burned a minute of energy on noise. Good. I stopped, forced my breath into square numbers, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, clicked the headlamp on, and found the green line on the GPS like it was a hand I trusted. From there, the job was simple math. Put 1 foot on that line at a time until there was road. Twice I turned the headlamp off and crouched behind a stump. The first time, the forest was a closed mouth. The second, I thought I heard something to my left, 50 yards out. Not running, not walking. Just that soft weight of a person shifting once and then choosing to be a tree. I counted, I listened, I moved on. Time lost count of itself. Distance became the only thing. Dawn is a rumor before it's a color. The sky lightened enough to make trees into separate facts. And then the road was there, exactly where it had promised it would be if I did my part. I stepped onto the rutted dirt and felt a kind of relief that has nothing to do with being safe and everything to do with being allowed to believe you might be. The truck looked wrong at first, as if it had become smaller in the night, and then it was just my truck. The key went in. The engine turned over on the second try, and the world shrank to windshield and washboard. I didn't look in the mirror for the first half mile because I didn't want to name anything that might have chosen to be there. When I did, finally, there was only the thin line of road unspooling and taking the forest with it. I didn't post about the tower. I didn't mark the GPS file with anything other than the date. I told one friend the bare outline and left out the piece with the ladder because he camps alone, and I like him. Weeks later, sitting in my apartment, a stair tread settled at 2 in the morning, and the small noise the wood made sounded exactly like a rung deciding to hold. I didn't sleep after that. Some nights I still don't. It isn't terror, not exactly. It's the certainty that there are places in the world where the math of how alone you are can suddenly produce the wrong answer. I know what a torch looks like from a distance. I know what a ladder sounds like when it carries weight. I know that my light found nothing where something should have been, and that a thing shaped like a person leaned over a hole and watched me choose to leave. Reason can make homes out of almost anything, but I haven't found one for that. I kept the photo of the truck at the trailhead. Every now and then I open it, look at the angle it sits at in the weeds, and remind myself I really did go there and I really did drive away. That's the part of the story that matters most to me. The rest can stay in the fraction of the night above a tower no one is supposed to be in, doing what old structures do when they wait for weather, listening. My dad used to call it our secret water. There's no sign for it on the highway, and no name you can type that brings up anything except a different lake 2 counties over. The old men at the hardware store pretend they don't know it. The fishermen call it a pond to keep it small in other people's heads. If you drive 10 minutes past, where the pavement turns to gravel, and then 5 past, where gravel turns to ruts and alder, there's a place to angle your car into the brush and make the rest on foot. The path is not a path so much as a memory of feet, and if you don't already know it, the woods will prefer you don't learn. The first time I went alone, I was 12, and my dad let me lead. He said nothing for long stretches, the way some people fish, quietly and with attention. He had a way of stepping that made no sound at all, and I used to think that meant he was more part of the forest than a visitor. I learned later it meant he listened harder than most people. We went in August, blackberries staining our fingers, the air thick with green. The lake appeared the way a door opens when you're already halfway through it. One step of shadow, then light on water and reeds whispering at their own speed. We didn't speak for a minute. Dad put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. Like, yes, this is the right place. 20 years later, after he was gone, I drove out there with one of those silences that knows its own weight. I brought the same blue camp chair we always used, and the little kettle with the dented bottom from the time he let it sit too long on the coals, telling me a story about getting lost on a mountain when he was 20. I told myself the trip was for the memories, but I'd also been walking in circles in my apartment lately, wearing a pattern into the rug, and I needed a larger circle. That day, the woods felt emptied of anything but summer. I parked where we always did and took a photo of my car the way I do now when I'm alone. Timestamp, breadcrumb, proof I arrived, and shouldered a small pack. The path was there and not there, just like it always had been. And I found it by looking where the ferns leaned and where the soil had forgotten how to hold moss. I said hello to the place under my breath when the water showed through the trees, because old habits remain if you feed them. The lake was as I remembered, but smaller, the way childhood rooms shrink to fit the adults who go back to look at them. The surface held the sky with a steadiness that felt like a promise. No boats, no trash, no tire tracks in the soft dirt above the shore. I walked the old route, down past the stump where Dad would set a thermos, across the narrow shelf of root and rock that makes a half moon, up to the small clearing with a view west, where sun falls and insects lift their conversations. My chair went there, and my pack, and I boiled water for tea just because the dented kettle belonged to this place. It was quiet in the way quiet can be complicated. I watched dragonflies thread low over the water and let the hours take the corners off my thoughts. Around late afternoon, I started my walk. Shoreline laps, clockwise like the lake was a clock that kept me honest. The first circuit I did quickly, scanning for signs of what other lives had been here since my last time. The second I did slow, reading tracks without touching them. Deer, small and many. Raccoon, playful by the reeds. A single coyote print in a bit of grey mud where the shore indents and holds memory longer. Nothing human. On my third lap I saw them, as if they had just arrived while I turned my back to look at the opposite bank. Them bare footprints. Not one or two, but a set, left, right, left, beginning in a sandy square above a tangle of roots and moving to the tree line where the brush thickens. They were clean and complete, heel, arch, toes, even the slight splay at the little toe that says a person doesn't wear shoes as often as most people do. They were not small. They were not large. They were simply human, and they had not been there before. The hair along my forearms noticed first. The sun had been hot, but I felt a draft where there was no wind. I crouched and put my hand next to one print. My hand almost covered it. The edges of the prints were tall and crisp, which meant recent, which meant within an hour, maybe within minutes, depending on how the dampness went. They faced the lake. Then they turned back into the woods and disappeared, where the ferns crowd together, and the leaf litter doesn't take impressions unless you kneel to read scuffs. I didn't kneel. I stood and looked at the water and did not see any ripples that belonged to whoever made those prints. My dad used to say there are two kinds of quiet. The quiet that means you're alone, and the quiet that means you're not. This was the second kind, and my body recognized it quicker than my mind agreed. I walked back to my chair, not hurrying, and made the mistake of looking behind me twice. Nothing. My camp looked the way a harmless afternoon's camp looks. Chair, kettle, a paperback face down on the armrest. Shoes off and socks tucked into themselves the way I do so one won't wander. I told myself what can be true. People swim. People take their shoes off to sit with their feet in the water and make the world smaller for a while. People wonder. I set a small fire the way we always did, not for warmth, but because flame makes company even when it's not supposed to. I adjusted a log and watched embers leap and land like tiny insects that didn't know what they were. Twilight is a place, not a time. The lake took the sky and turned it into copper, then iron, then a black that made the trees into ideas instead of facts. That's when they came, the two shapes at the edge of the firelight, not stepping into it, not speaking. A man and a woman, standing side by side just where the glow ends and the dark begins. If I had raised the fire, I could have seen their faces, but the part of me that wanted that had an argument with the part that didn't. I chose the not knowing that lets you keep moving. Can I help you? I said, because we are trained to be polite even at our own expense. The woman turned and ran. It was immediate and total, the way a deer goes from statue to absence. She vanished into the trees without tripping over anything I could see, which made me think she had done this before, whatever this was. The man remained. He did not turn to watch her go. He did not look at me either. He stood with his weight even across both feet, the way coaches tell you to stand when you're ready. I looked down and registered the detail my mind had been avoiding, bare feet. The light reached just enough to draw whiteness along the top of his toes and the tendon on the front of the ankle. No shoes in his hands, no pack on his shoulders, no explanation in the posture that would have helped. Are you okay? I tried and heard my voice on the water and nowhere else. He turned without answering and walked into the trees, slow and straight, exactly along the route where the footprints had come earlier. I sat there for a minute that had 10 more minutes folded inside it. Then I started to put my things away. I am not the kind of person who narrates bravery to myself. I have left camps for smaller reasons. The way that man stood at the edge of the light told me he understood the edge better than I did, and the fact that the woman ran told me they had a plan for what they wanted me to do. I obliged them by not being there for it. Packing took 5 minutes because I made it take 5. I rolled the chair, dumped the kettle, slid the book inside the pack without checking where my bookmark had gone. I spread the fire into a thin circle with the stick we always used and poured lake water over it until the hiss turned to silence and the ash turned to dark mud. I shouldered the pack and did not look at the place where the two had been. I looked at the path, which is less a path at night than a prayer, and I said the small, quiet words I say when I want my feet to remember. What they learned from someone who isn't here to remind them. The first 10 minutes were the worst because the lake still held some light and the forest took none. My headlamp made tunnels. The ferns shone with the kind of green that belongs on fish and not on land. I kept to the right where the ground is higher and the roots are like braids instead of snares. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped in a way that said wait and not wind. I did not stop. I let my breath be a metronome. In for 4 steps. Out for 4 steps. Repeat until road. It took maybe 20 minutes for the first run to happen. Not my run, theirs. It came from my left side, 50 yards away, a sound like bare soles choosing soft ground, and then accelerating on it for 5 seconds, and then gone. My body wanted to turn and square to it the way you square to a wave. But squaring to the dark is a good way to stand still in it. I kept walking. My light stayed on the ground directly ahead of my toes. When the second run came from the right a few minutes later, I understood the pattern. They were leapfrogging me. Not closing. Not falling behind. Tracking. I told myself anything that sounds calmer than stalking and did not believe myself a little bit less each time. There is a kind of listening that makes all other sounds disappear. The forest had it. No insects, no nightbirds, no frog thrum from the reeds. Even the breeze felt like it had tucked itself carefully into the needles so as not to be part of this. My footsteps, and my breath, and occasionally one of theirs, and once the soft thud of a pine cone giving up its grip. The headlamp's beam bounced with my steps in a way that became its own count. I let math be a comfort. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. At the halfway point, there's an old blown-down cedar that we used to crawl under. Time has crushed it lower. I went to my knees and slid. When I stood on the other side, I listened and heard nothing. When I took my next step, something to my left matched it with a step of its own. I stopped. It stopped. The ridiculous thought that we could do this forever arrived and left and came back again. I moved. It moved. I began to speak, because sometimes noise is the only tool you have. I'm leaving, I said, to the trunks and the black. You can have it. I don't know if they heard or if hearing mattered. The next run came behind me, closer than I liked. The sound of a shape, too certain of its map to hit a branch. I felt the nearest version of what other people call prayer, not to be delivered from anything, but to remain exactly the same distance from it as I was. The forest granted that wish the way an animal tolerates you when it doesn't care enough to be angry. When the road arrived, it did so without ceremony. One step there was root and duff and the possibility of twisted ankles. And the next, there was compacted gravel and the certainty of direction. My car sat where I had left it, its shape looking strange in the sudden honesty of my headlamp before resolving into the familiar. I unlocked it with a sound that felt unforgivably loud, and got in and locked the doors and put the key into the slot without dropping it. The engine turned on, and the radio remembered a station with static in it. I put my hand on the volume and dialed the world back to just enough. I watched the tree line in the rear view until the road curved and made looking back a different choice than going forward. Nothing stepped out of the dark to make a decision for me. Nothing followed with lights or with anything at all. I drove slow until the ruts became gravel, and gravel became pavement. And then I drove the speed limit in a way that felt like a gift I was giving myself. At home, I didn't tell anyone about the barefoot prints for a week. When I did, I left out the part about the woman sprinting and the man not moving, because that piece makes you sound like you are adding drama to a story that has enough. I went back and looked at my shoes in the hall and found them muddy in a way that reassured me I had really been there and done the walking I remembered. I washed the kettle and set it on the stove and didn't make tea. Sometimes now, when I wake at 4, I see the prints again the way the lake had them, pressed clean into damp sand, facing the water like the water had something to say. In the dream, my dad stands where the man stood, just beyond the edge of my light, and he doesn't move either. And I have the thought that there are people who belong more to places than to other people. And sometimes, the place is what comes looking for you when you forget it too long. There are rational doors you can walk through to close this story. Maybe locals swim there more than I knew. Maybe a couple from one of the hidden cabins in the hills takes night walks without shoes. Because some people choose to touch the ground more directly than the rest of us do. Maybe they were high. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they weren't watching me at all, just orbiting something I wandered into by accident, like someone else's ritual or route. But there is another door that doesn't shut when you push it. And behind it is the shape of two people who knew exactly where the light ended and chose to stand there. In the knowledge that the forest can make witnesses out of anyone if it wants. I've not been back to the lake since that night. It still exists in the right place on the map, only my feet can read. And it is still small enough to keep its own secrets. I imagine the prints wash away every afternoon and reappear at dusk, heel, arch, toes, facing the same direction as if waiting for someone who is late and has been for years. Dad used to say, when the evening came down and we'd pack to leave, "Give the water back its quiet." I did, finally. The quiet it makes now when I think of it is not the kind that means I'm alone. It's the other kind. The kind that says something else is standing just at the edge of the light, polite as a visitor who knows the house better than you do, patient as a place that doesn't have to hurry. Spring in Washington remembers how to rain. Not the kind that throws itself at you and leaves, this kind has patience. It starts as a mist that beads on your jacket and ends up inside every seam you thought was sealed. I was a few months into living out of a short wheelbase camper van, learning which forest roads had the good pullouts and which ones only looked like they did until you woke up axle deep. I liked the spur roads that die into nothing, a widening of mud and pine needles, a circle where trucks have turned around for 20 years. No houses, no traffic, and if you park with your nose out, you can pretend you're only visiting the dark. I'd been leapfrogging between two cities that hate each other's sports teams. When I needed groceries or a shower, I dipped into one. When I needed silence, I dipped back out. That day I took a side road I didn't know off a forest highway I barely knew, and followed it until the gravel loosened under the tires, and the map on my phone gave up pretending. One more fork, one more bend. Then the road ended at a wide, swallowed circle with a stone fire ring in the middle, and moss already winning the argument against it. No beer cans, no fresh ruts, no wet footprints where a truck door would have opened. Sometimes emptiness is a sign that a place belongs to someone else. This looked like it belonged to rain. I idled long enough to listen. Engines tell things to the woods you don't want passed along. When I shut it off, the quiet came through in layers, the roof ticking as it cooled, water discussing the cedar boughs, a distant creek deciding what to do next. I leveled the van the best the bubble would allow and set the brake. I slid the side door open to let the evening in and arranged the basics into the small rituals that make a box with wheels into a room. Propane stove on the counter, cutting board, a mug placed where it always goes, just so a hand can find it in the dark later without seeing. Every person who lives like this invents their own version of ordinary. Mine has few moving parts and no ornament beyond. The wind chime I keep wrapped in a rag because something about its sound makes me feel like I'm borrowing luck. It was one of those grey evenings that pretends to last forever and then drops all at once. The rain thickened toward nightfall. I pulled the door mostly shut, left a small gap for air, and propped the window over the bed half open. I set water to boil and chopped an onion with my body turned sideways out of habit. So anyone who looked in would only see a shoulder and a profile, and not the shock of eye contact that makes strangers curious. I didn't think anyone would look in, but this is how you teach your animal self not to relax too much when the weather does the opposite. A glare slid across my laptop screen while a show pretended to keep me company. It came from behind me, white, rectangular, moving slow like someone had aimed a beam and was walking with it in their hands. It crossed the screen from right to left and vanished. I turned. The window behind the bed faces trees only, no road, no spur, not even a path worn by deer. It was dark behind the glass in a way that felt complete. I reached toward the shade and hesitated. There's a little act you do when you want to see outside at night. You cup your hands to cancel your reflection, press forehead to glass, and make a tunnel. I didn't do it. Instead, I shut the window and latched it and told myself there were reasons. Maybe a reflection, maybe my own screen bouncing off something metal in here. Reason is a good employee. You can give it any assignment and it will try. Rain tightened. Thunder began to roll in heavy sheets that climbed up from somewhere far off and crossed the clearing roof to roof. Thunder does a useful job when you sleep alone. It reminds you that the world is bigger than the box you're in. It also wipes away smaller sounds, and that's the part you have to respect. I cleaned up, slid everything into the places it lives, pulled the door shut, drew the blackout covers over the windows, clicked lights off, and lay in the dark for a while, letting the van announce each new drop with small sounds I knew the names of. The mattress was warm in the way that makes you believe a second body could be there. Sleep didn't arrive, but something like it did. The waiting room version, with uncomfortable chairs and a loop of weather. An hour later, the thunder was staffing the sky full time. That's when I heard something move outside. A single sound, but specific. The careless kick of a branch on the ground, the kind a human foot makes when it's walking in the wrong place to be quiet and has to choose between steady and stealth. It came from near the sliding door. The van's skin is thin enough for noises to get the shape of the things that made them. This had knees. I slid one hand under the pillow and found the flashlight I keep there, and then slid it back out without turning it on. The covers over the windows made the interior dark enough to touch. I lay very still, because stillness makes you hear more, not less. The rain ran its hand over the roof, and the wind said something smaller to the fur directly above. And under all that, a voice came and went along the side of the van. A man whispering, not whispering to me, whispering like he was telling someone else what he saw. I held my breath without deciding to. The whisper ended. A weight leaned against the side door. The plastic panel complained softly, in a voice too low to travel anywhere, but inside the van. Then 3 knuckles rapped. Not the kind of knock a friend uses, but the kind a polite stranger thinks will convince you they aren't a stranger. I didn't answer. 5 seconds. 3 raps again. The same pause, as if waiting for the line where "excuse me" feels like an order. Rain ticked and hissed. I felt my own pulse in my teeth. A minute, 2. Then a sentence, spoken in a voice that wanted to be official and arrived only at practiced. Sheriff's Department. Open up, no ma'am, no name. No call out by plate or make. No light bars spilling color into the clearing or reflectors, throwing it back. The words sounded like an outfit over someone who... It didn't fit it. I slid an inch toward the... small panel above the counter, where the blackout shade didn't seal perfectly and raised one corner the width of a finger. The world outside was water and shadow. A shape stood near the sliding door, close enough for rain to find the shoulder and run off. No hat brim. No radio on the chest. No sidearm silhouette. Just a person. Behind him, because the certainty that it was a him arrived at the same speed certainty often does when it's not allowed to be proof. Another shape moved just beyond my angle. A head turning, the suggestion of a second pair of eyes. "Sheriff's Department," he said again. A little louder, like asserting the title would make the rest come true. I slid the shade down and let my hand find the ignition key I keep on a small hook by the column between the seats. There are a few decisions you rehearse in your head long before you make them. And if you live alone on wheels long enough, you rehearse this one. Start the van while someone is next to it. Don't fumble. Don't talk. Don't wait to see what they do next. Do the thing you came here in a vehicle to be able to do. Leave. The crawl forward from bed to driver's seat is short in a van like this. You can cover it in 2 lunges. I did. I kept the lights off because you can see more of what matters with everything dark inside and everything on outside. My hand missed the key once, and then didn't. The engine turned over and the idling sound stepped into the clearing like a dog you're glad to see. I pressed the brake and shifted into drive before the dash finished, saying what it always says about doors and fuel. Outside, footsteps broke into a run. More than one. One from beside the sliding door. One from somewhere near the rear, closing fast as the van's pitch changed with my right foot. I steered around the fire ring and felt the tires decide who they wanted to be, mud grabbing at the sidewalls, the nose want to push. The only thing worse than getting stuck here would be getting stuck for a reason I chose. The van caught, bit, and went forward. A face appeared in the smearing half-light at my window, hooded, wrong distance. Gone in the same half-second as the wiper made a clean arc and then left nothing but rain again. I don't know if he banged an open palm on the glass or if my mind put that sound in. Because that's what a body expects at that distance. My foot kept doing its job. The spur road back to the main line isn't long when you use it to arrive. Leaving stretches it. The ruts asked to steer for me, and I let them until I couldn't. Until they wanted me in the ditch. And then I took the wheel back and drove over what looked too soft because the left tire said it would hold if I asked right. The mirror stayed dark behind me, no wash of headlights bouncing between trunks, no spotlight finding the back window and filling the van with white. Only rain. Only the left-right flick of trees pretending to be the same tree over and over. When the forest road widened into the place where the county pretends to maintain it, I risked a look. The spur behind me had become a vertical cut of night. If there were people in it, they had chosen to be without vehicles, or they were smart enough not to make me a witness to theirs. The dash clock said a time I wouldn't have guessed. It's strange how nights like this take more minutes than the ones you show to friends. I drove until signs had words on them again, and then drove until the words made sense, and then drove into the first gas station that still had light. I parked under a camera, where a man behind bulletproof glass could be confused about whether I was going to ask for cigarettes or cry. I bought coffee I didn't want because buying something makes you a customer and not a scare. My hand shook after I lifted the lid and burned my lip. The attendant watched without offering a word from a script for this. There isn't one. I left and parked near the edges, where the light thins, and turned the engine off and let the quiet back in. Calling the non-emergency number felt like a superstition. Tell the story to make it smaller. The woman who answered put me on hold, for long enough that I wondered if the people at the spur had walked far enough down the road to be in the same parking lot with me now. When she came back, she took the description like it was a form that had the wrong boxes. No vehicle, no badge, said Sheriff's Department. 2 voices. She took my name and said someone would log it and call if there were questions. The call ended, and the van was a small, tired animal that had done its job and wanted nothing more than a new patch of ground to stand on. I didn't sleep. You don't sleep well the first night after you choose to keep being a person. I watched the fuel pumps under their rain, and the way people who prefer the night drifted between puddles, their faces hidden not by intention but by the angle the light makes humanoid things into shadows. At some point, I gave the van back to the road and let it run until the sky in the east admitted there was such a thing as morning. I found an RV park that takes vans for too much money and paid it without asking for the Wi-Fi code. I closed the curtains and let dawn lay along the edges and fell into something not deep enough to be sleep and not shallow enough to be anything else. In the afternoon, I drove to the county office because sometimes you need a person in front of you to tell you what you already know. The deputy at the desk had the kind of face weather makes honest. I gave him the time, the road, the description that wasn't one. He tilted his head when I said the line about Sheriff's Department and made a note like he'd heard it before and wasn't allowed to say so. We didn't have units out there, he said finally, and looked at me in a way that meant, and you knew that when you started the van. Could have been someone playing around, he added, the way people give you a branch to grab coming down a slope. Could have, I said. I took the branch anyway and still slid. That night it rained again. I parked in a different place, farther from everything and closer to nothing, and listened. I left the chime wrapped. I left my shoes where I could find them with my eyes closed. I let the van settle and announced it to myself the way a pilot must at the end of a long day. Engine off, systems safe, ground under wheels. I waited for sleep and heard the echo of knuckles on plastic waiting with me. When a branch fell somewhere beyond the clearing and the ground reported it up through the frame, I thought of the man at my window. The hood. The wrongness that had the shape of a person and none of the light. I thought of the second set of feet. There are ways to make this feel less strange. Maybe they were lost and desperate and said sheriff's department because they thought it would get them help and not a locked door. Maybe they were prank kids who picked the wrong van on the wrong night and found out some people don't open doors in the rain. Maybe somewhere along that dead-end road, a truck sat with its lights off, and a friend with a better sense of when to move waited for a signal that didn't come. But the quiet that sat with me later wasn't the kind you get after an explanation. It was the other kind. The quiet that remembers your name when you don't answer. In it, I could hear the exact cadence of those 3 knocks, traveling from the past into the present without losing any detail. In it, I could still see the bright rectangle crossing the laptop screen long before anything else happened. Like a trailer for a film you don't want to watch. In it, the decision to start the van felt less like bravery and more like the only version of sense left to someone who had already passed up several others. If you want a lesson, I have only practical ones. Don't open. Keep the key where your hand finds it without thinking. Park, nose out. Don't announce when you're alone. Keep your animal self trained enough to listen and polite enough to obey when it says now. The county never called back. I didn't expect them to. Their work is to answer questions that have answers. Mine was to keep moving. Sometimes when thunder rolls over a place I'm visiting now, I feel the van's skin take the sound and pass it through. And I raise my hand without meaning to and aim it at the door, as if waiting to catch a rhythm I already know. I tell myself I'm listening for rain patterns. My body doesn't believe me. It hears a man say a sentence he practiced in a mirror and another set of feet waiting for it to work. There's a road that dies into a circle with a fire ring swallowed by moss, and it belongs to rain, and it belongs to anyone who chooses to be a shape in it after midnight. I don't think I'll see it again. I don't think I need to. Some places only want you once. Some nights don't know how to leave when you do.